You're listening to Hearing the Silence of a Convicted Mind. I'm Chameleon. I don't chase noise. I study silence. Let's listen carefully. The case was closed. The sentence was final. But the language didn't stop. When a convicted mind speaks, most people listen for regret. I listen for rehearsal. This episode examines a composite offender, not a single person, but a stitched profile built from dozens of recorded calls and transcripts. Convicted of organized financial fraud, sentenced and transferred, he continued to speak. I review the calls because pattern recognition depends on repetition. What felt off was not the content alone. It was the way agency was erased. He rarely used I. Actions happened, things were done. Plans existed, but nobody was assigned responsibility. I noted 3 persistent signals. First, grammatical choices that shifted responsibility away from a single agent. Second, measured silences that punctuated those agentless phrases. Third, behavioral moves that used depersonalized language to test compliance. Together they form a strategy, subtle, low bandwidth, effective behind concrete walls. A. The language shift. He wasn't speaking in past tense. He was rehearsing possibility. Instead of, I did X, you hear X was done, or mistakes were made. Pronouns drift. They replaces specific names. The team becomes a floating subject. Repetition of agentless constructions does 2 things. It diffuses blame and it preserves options. When someone says, there were plans, that phrase keeps the plan alive without admitting authorship. That loss of ownership is defensive, but also strategic. It lets a narrative survive scrutiny while avoiding direct lines back to an individual. Listen to this pattern in miniature. He repeats a noun, not a verb. The arrangement, then a pause, then a future-oriented clause. Repetition anchors the idea. The passive framing erases who will carry it out. From a behavioral standpoint, that language is rehearsal. It keeps options open. It signals to listeners that a roadmap exists, without committing the speaker to any single step. B. The silence. Silence has patterns. The pauses are not empty. There is a pause before key phrases, a held breath, a micro gap before an agentless clause. Those pauses work like punctuation in a confession or a contract. A short pause lets the listener fill in agency. A longer pause gives the speaker time to select language that removes it. In recordings, I timed these pauses. They clustered around strategy words, plan, arrangement, they, we. The breath pattern flattens. Emotional peaks are dampened. The voice keeps even not numb, but controlled. That flatness makes depersonalization feel natural to the listener. It reduces alarm. You stop asking, who did it? And instead discuss what happened. Hear me. Silence is rarely empty. When agency disappears, silence often does the erasing. C. The manipulation. Agentless phrases make small requests easier. Instead of saying, I need you to do X, the speaker frames it as, it would be useful if X happened. Requests disguised as observations test compliance without explicit instruction. They invite others to fill in the missing actor. In the calls, these were often compliance probes. Would it help if the documents were moved? Notice the grammar. Passive, conditional, depersonalized. The aim is social testing. A captive communicator can't execute broadly, but he can influence. Compliance here is cheap. A signature, a call, a minor favor, and it buys leverage. Those tiny transactions maintain influence across the barrier of conviction. Over time, this three-part architecture becomes a toolkit. Passive voice keeps the plan legible but unassigned. Pauses manage perception. Depersonalized requests keep networks active. Together they form a low-risk pathway for strategy to survive sentencing. Escalation insight. Conviction does not end cognition. Incarceration limits movement, not strategy. Language becomes a medium of mobility. When physical action is constrained, the cognitive work shifts to linguistic maintenance, rehearsing contingencies, testing allies, preserving plausible deniability. Agentless language supports network maintenance. It lets someone nurture options without directly instructing operation. For forensic listeners, this matters because influence can be maintained at scale through speech alone. The content of language becomes a form of deferred action. This is not dramatic. It is precise. It is also adaptive. Some offenders learn to use language as a continuation of strategy. They migrate from hands-on roles to architects of expectation. That migration is ordinary, it is efficient. The chilling realization, maybe he wasn't reacting. Maybe this was the next phase of planning. Maybe the erasure of I is intentional. Maybe those pauses were rehearsed. Short sentences. Let it sit. He spoke in conditionals. He offered possibilities. He never volunteered ownership. Silence arranged itself into strategy. Conviction closes cases. It doesn't always close patterns. Silence has patterns. Listen carefully. If you want more episodes that decode constrained language, subscribe to the show. Each episode gives you precise listening cues you can use. Identify passive constructions, time the pauses, and flag depersonalized requests. The pattern never disappears. It only changes form. Is the truth in what is said? Incarceration restricts movement. It does not restrict cognition. Some minds adapt. That's what I heard.
They call it manipulation. Sometimes it's adaptation to constant observation. Because when you know someone's always listening, you learn how to speak without saying everything.